Good day, viewers and listeners. I'm back again to continue with you from where I stopped the last time on English. And today, like I said, we are going to move on to a different thing. But before we do that, can we please, first of all, have a quick recap or review of the homework that I gave you the last time when we look at adjectives. And here is the homework. The instructions says, in each sentence, underline the adjective and circle the noun that it described. Here, we are going to underline the adjective and then circle the noun that the adjective describes. The first sentence, number one, mother cooked a delicious meal. Mother cooked a delicious meal. Here the adjective is what? Delicious. We underline it. And the noun that delicious describes is what? Meal. So we circle the noun meal. We move on to the second one. A swarm of birds could be seen in the dark sky. A swarm of birds could be seen in the dark sky. Here the adjective is dark. And the noun it describes is sky. So we underline the adjective, which is dark, and circle the noun sky. Number three, my dad loves his red hat. My dad loves his red hat. My dad loves his red hat. Here the adjective, remember I said it tells us the color, and the color here is what? Red. That's the adjective. And the noun that it describes is hat. So we underline red and circle hat. 4, an egg has an oval shape. An egg has an oval shape. Here, remember adjective also tells us the shape of things. And here the shape is what? Oval. So the adjective is oval, and the noun it describes is what? The shape. So we underline oval and circle shape. The fifth one, the math scientist worked all night on his creation. The mad scientist worked all night on his creation. Here, the noun here is what? Scientist. And the adjective describing scientist is mad. So we underline mad as the adjective and then circle scientist as the noun that it describes. So that was the homework, and I believe you were able to do it correctly. Now what we do is we move on to our today's topic. And today we are going to look at comparison of adjectives. Comparison of adjectives. Remember, we said an adjective is a word used to modify or describe a noun or pronoun. Now here today, we are going to look at the comparison. How do we compare? How do we use adjectives to compare things or to compare nouns? There are three forms of adjectives used to show varying degrees of comparison. And these are the positive, which is also called the initial adjective or the base form of the adjective. Secondly, the comparative and the superlative. These are the three forms of adjectives used to show varying degrees of comparison. The positive, the comparative, and the superlative. The positive form, which is also called the initial adjective, is used when there is no direct comparison being made to anything specific, but is used to offer a broad or general comparison. In other words, it describes a noun on its own. Take, for example, Lermin is a tall boy. Lermin is a tall boy. Now here, tall is describing the boy who is learning. Here we are not comparing Lermin with another person or we are not comparing Lermin with another person. Instead, we are just giving a general comparison of Lermin's height. We move on now to the comparative form. The comparative form is used to compare one noun to another noun. In this instance, only two things are being compared. Remember the positive? We look at a general comparison, but here we are comparing. When we look at the comparative, we are comparing one noun to the other, to another noun. For example, someone might say, the market in Balangar is smaller than the market in Kaul. Here we are comparing two markets, the market in Balangar and the market in Kaul. So the comparative we are using here is what? Smaller. Now we move on to the next one, which is the superlative form. The superlative form is used to compare three or more nouns. They are also used to compare one thing against the rest of a group. Here, for example, Serekunda is the biggest market in the Gambia. We are comparing Serekunda with the rest of the markets in the Gambia. So obviously it is more than three or more. So here we are talking about many. And now when you talk about many, comparing three or more, you use what? The superlative. And that is why we use the superlative here, biggest. And we have another example. He is the tallest kid in the class. Look at here. We are comparing he with the rest of the groups, with the class. with the rest of the members of the class. So these are the two examples. We move on, and as we continue, you will now understand how to form these regular comparatives and superlative. Now next we are going to look at forming regular comparatives and superlatives. Forming comparatives and superlatives is easy. The form depends on the number of syllables in the original adjective, or in the base form, or in the initial adjective. So meaning the number of syllables are unit of pronunciation in words with at least a single vowel. For example, when we say cat, this is just one unit of pronunciation. So cat is one syllable. When we say, for example, busy, here we have two units of pronunciation. We have two syllables, busy. And if you say, for another example, important, here we might have three syllables, im, po, and tan. Three syllables. So here we are saying to form regular comparative and superlative, it depends on the number of syllables in the original adjective. Now we look at one syllable adjectives. The first rule is what? We add ER for the comparative. Remember, we said comparative, you compare one noun to the other. Here you are comparing two things. So when you are comparing two things, you add ER to the original adjective. And EST for the superlative. When you are comparing three or more, you add EST to the original adjective. If the adjective has a consonant and single vowel plus consonant spelling, the final consonant must be doubled before adding the ing. What we are saying is this. For example, if you have this word, hot, here you have a consonant, you have a single vowel, and you have a consonant. In other words, it is also like a CVC word. What we are saying here is when you are comparing two now, you will first of all double this last letter, and then you add ER. That is for the comparative. Now for the superlative, the same thing. You double the last letter, and then you add EST. And that becomes hotter, hottest. This is what we are saying. Now looking at the examples that are given to us in the chart. The chart is having 3 columns, and that is adjective, comparative, and superlative. Now we start with the first adjective. Tall, when you compare two things, you add ER, you say taller. It becomes taller. And then when you compare 3, you add EST to the original adjective, which is tall, EST, and now that becomes tallest. Tall taller, tallest. The next original adjective is what? Fat. Now looking at the comparative, remember I told you if we have a consonant and a single vowel and then a consonant spelling, we have to double the last letter. And that is what we have exactly in the word, in this adjective fat. So therefore we are going to form the comparative. We are going to double the last letter, which is the T, and then add ER. And for the superlative, we also double the last letter, which is the T, and add EST. And that becomes what? Fat, fatter, fattest. We move on to the next example, which is big. The same thing. You have to double the last letter because of the consonant, the single vowel, and then consonant spelling. So we double the last letter. That becomes now big, bigger, biggest. And the last one is sad. We double the last letter to have and then add ER. And that becomes sadder. And then for the superlative, we also double the last letter and then add EST, and that becomes saddest. So that is for one syllable adjectives. Now we move to two syllable adjectives. Adjectives with two syllables can form their comparative either by adding ER or by preceding the adjective with more. Meaning here, words with two syllables, if we want to form their comparative, we can either add ER to the original adjective, or we use more preceding the original adjective before the adjective. That is what we mean by preceding. You either use ER or use more before the original adjective. These adjectives form their comparatives either by adding EST or by these adjectives form their superlatives either by adding EST to the original adjective or by bringing or writing most before the original adjective. In many cases, both forms are used, although one usage will be more common than the other. If you are not sure whether a two-syllable adjective can take a comparative or superlative ending, play safe. Use more and must instead, just to play safe. For adjectives ending in Y, letter Y, change this Y to I, and then you add ER for the comparative and EST for the superlative. And we have some examples here. Here also in this chart we have 3 columns, and in each column, 3 columns. The first column, adjective, that is the original adjective. The second column we have comparative, and then superlative. So here you have seen the example, happy is the original adjective. So to form the comparative, Remember the rule that I told you, the word ends with Y, so we are going to change the Y to I. We change the Y to I and then add ER. And for superlative, the same thing, we change the Y to I and then add EST. So it becomes happy, happier, happiest. The next one is simple. The comparative, simpler. Remember simple? To form the comparative, we just add and the superlative, we just add st, because the original word ends with letter E, so the E is already there. So it becomes simple, simpler, simplest. And the next one is what? Clever, cleverer. We add ER to clever, the original word, and it becomes cleverer. And then the superlative becomes cleverest. We add EST. The next one is what? Famous. Like I told you, if you don't know which one to use, just to play safe, what do? We use more for the comparative and then most for the superlative. So we have famous, more famous, most famous. And the next one, which is helpful, more helpful for the comparative, most helpful, superlative. Now we move on to the next one, 3 or more syllables. But please remember what I told you about syllable. Look at all these words. Happy, 2 syllables. Simple, 2 syllables. Clever, 2 syllables. Famous, 2 syllables. Unit of pronunciation. And here, 1 syllable. Tall, fat, big, sad. 1 unit of pronunciation. But if you look at 2 syllables, we have 2 units. And now we are going to look at 3 or more syllables, where we have 3 units or more units of pronunciation. Adjectives with 3 or more syllables form their comparative by putting more in front of the adjective, and their superlative by putting most. So for 3 or more, we use more for the comparative, and we use most for the superlative. Now let's look at the original adjectives. The first one is important. Remember, here we have 3 syllables. Important. So therefore, for the comparative, we use more. So it becomes more important, and for the superlative, most important. Important, more important, most important. The next one is what? Expensive. Expensive. 3 syllables. So we use more for the comparative and most for the superlative. Expensive, more expensive, most expensive. And now the last adjective, which is delicious. Delicious. Also 3 syllables. So we use more and most for the comparative and superlative. Delicious, more delicious, most delicious. And now we move on to irregular, comparative, and superlative. However, you know that you will understand that not all adjectives follow this rule. So we have irregular ones, and these very common adjectives have completely irregular comparative and superlative. Example given is good. It does not follow the rule where you add er and say gooder, and add est and say goodest. No. Good, and the comparative becomes better, then the superlative best. Next one is what? Bad. We don't say badder, baddest. It's different. It's completely irregular. So bad, worse, and worst. Little, less, least. Much, more, most. Far, farther or further, farthest or furthest. So these are the irregular ones. Now, I have an activity for you that we are going to look at together, and in this activity, the instruction says, complete the chart using the comparative and the superlative form of each adjective. Think carefully about numbers 4 and 5. And here in the chart, the first adjective has been done for you, that is fast, faster, fastest. Here, for the comparative, you add er. For the superlative, you add est. Now, the next one is what? Big. The superlative is not there, the comparative is not there, and the superlative. So you are going to fill that. Remember the rule? We have a consonant, a single vowel, and a consonant. So we are going to double the last letter. It becomes bigger and then biggest. We add er for the comparative and est for the superlative. And now the next one, the next adjective, we are not given, the adjective is not given, the comparative is not given, but the superlative is angry, angriest, angriest. So that tells us that because we have seen the I, and I told you which letter do we change. When a word ends with Y, we change the Y to I before we add ER or EST. So that tells us that the original word will be angry. And that Y is what we are going to change now to I and add ER to form the comparative. Now we have angry, angrier, angriest. And now we move on to the next one, which is 4 and 5. Remember, you are told to think about those numbers carefully, which is good because these ones are irregular ones. The comparative becomes better, and then the superlative best. And the last one, which is bad, comparative, worse, and superlative worst. That is for that. And now we move on to exercise 2. We move on to activity 2 now. And in this activity, comparative and superlative. The comparative, you have been reminded that you will have done and then ER to be added to the adjective to form the comparative. And for the superlative, the, and then EST will be added to the original adjective. And now let's practice now. The first one says, so you need to take note of this, than and the. Than for the comparative, but remember to add er to the adjective. The for the superlative, but also remember to add est to the adjective. Now we practice again. In this sentence, we have Ali is thus than Adam. And the adjective at the end of the sentence in curly brackets is tall. Here, how many people are we comparing? Two, that is Ali and Adam. And we say when we compare two, we use the comparative. But again, you have seen on your screen that we should add er to the adjective. So therefore, when we add er to the adjective tall, it becomes what? Taller. And now we put taller in that blank. Now the sentence becomes, Ali is taller than Adam. Now we move to the second one. Pineapples are thus than oranges. And the adjective we have in brackets at the end of the sentence is sweet. Here we are also comparing two things, pineapples and oranges. So therefore we are going to use the comparative. And when we use the comparative, we say we are going to add er to the adjective. So when we add er to the adjective sweet, the word becomes sweeter. So when we put sweeter in the blank, our sentence now becomes pineapples are sweeter than oranges. Now we move on to the third one. The winter is the dash season. Remember, the is for the superlative. So therefore we are going to add est to the adjective. And the adjective in bracket is cold. So when we add est to cold, it becomes coldest. And therefore the sentence will be now, winter is the coldest season. Winter is the coldest season. Now the fourth one, number 4. This television is the last one in the shop. Remember, when you get into a shop, you have lots of television. So if you are comparing this television with the rest, then you are going to use what? The superlative. And now the adjective we have in bracket at the end of the sentence is big. So therefore, we are going to add es to big. But remember the rule, before we add es, we have to double the last letter. And now it becomes what? Biggest. And now, if we put biggest in the sentence is going to be like, this television is the biggest one in the shop. And the last one, which is number 5, my bag is thus than yours. My bag is thus than yours. And the adjective is what? Heavy. That's the adjective we have in brackets at the end of the sentence. Now here we are comparing two things, two bags. My bag and your bag. So since we are comparing two, are we going to use the comparative or the superlative? The comparative. Very good. So therefore, and when we use the comparative, we say we are going to add er. But before we add er, remember the adjective ends with y. What do? We change that y to I, and then we add er. And now it becomes what? Heavier. Now we put heavier in the blank, and now let me read the sentence if we do that. My bag is heavier than yours. So that was the last question, and now we'll move on to activity 3. This activity, you are going to do it as a homework, and when we meet again, we are going to look at it before we proceed with the next lesson. Here, I want you to use more or most. Remember, more compares 2 things, and most compares 3 or more things. Let me read the directions or the instruction. Put more or most in front of each adjective. Put more or most in front of each adjective. So now I read the sentences. Football is thus dangerous than golf. Football is thus dangerous than golf. Number 2, spaghetti is the thus wonderful meal there is. Spaghetti is the thus wonderful meal there is. Number 3, you ask the thus interesting questions. You ask the thus interesting questions. 4, science is thus difficult than arts. Science is thus difficult than science. Science is thus difficult than arts. And the last question, number 5, rabbits are the thus lovable animals. Rabbits are the thus lovable animals. So these are the questions. Use more, remember, when you're comparing 2, and use most when you're comparing 3 or more, to fill in the blanks in each sentence. Thank you so much. That's the end of the lesson. Work out those questions before we meet again. And thank you so much for being with me. That's the end of the lesson. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.